great. I know he's going to do it. The trap of being utterly convinced that God will act in the way that I want him to act. So there's the two traps: cynicism, thinking there's no point, or triumphalism, being convinced that God will, or presuming God will work in the way that I want him to work. And kind of both these attitudes, I think, are a bit of a failing to understand what God's really like and how God really works. And to kind of combat both these attitudes, we're going to look at, well, quite an awesome story in 1 Samuel. The background for this story is that kind of Israel are in a pretty hopeless situation. They've had their first king of Israel, King Saul, but instantly what's happened is that the Philistines have attacked, decimated the Israelite army, and now basically all the Israelite army are hiding in caves. And it gets even worse. They're not just hiding in caves. The Philistines had come into Israel and they had taken all the blacksmiths out of Israel. So not only were Israel hiding in caves, they also had no swords. In fact, it gets to the point where there are only 2 swords in all of Israel. Saul has a sword, and Saul's son Jonathan has a sword. It is like completely and utterly helpless. I tried to think of what kind of the best equivalent. Can you guys see that? Ooh. The best equivalent is for us today. And I thought it was a bit like Anthony Joshua, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and I always called him Mike Tyson, Tyson Fury, in a fight against Josh with his trusty spoon. It's a total hopeless situation. But equally, it could very much feel like UCL, CU with, I don't know, however many people that we have, going up against all of UCL. What is it? Does anyone know how many students go to UCL?
40,000.
40,000. And how many of us are there here today? 11 or 12. It feels hopeless. And also, we kind of feel very much like Israel. Like all our usual weapons to do mission have been taken away from us. We can't offer people free food. We can't go flyering. We feel very hopeless. But I hope this story will really, really help. Carson, are you able to share turn to 1 Samuel chapter 14, and we're just going to read the first 23 verses. It's a fairly long bit, but try and stick with the story because I think it will really help us. I would probably turn to your Bibles just in case screen share doesn't work. Don't worry, Carson. I'll just read it out. That's fine. All right. So remember the situation. It's hopeless. And then we're going to read the story. Oh, there you go. Let me read it out. Stick with it. It's a little bit long, but you'll see why. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah, under a pomegranate tree in Migron. With him were about 600 men, among whom was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. He was the son of Ichabod's brother. Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Bozez, and the other Seneh. One cliff stood to the north towards Michmash, and the other to the south towards Geba. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost, to go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." "Do all that you have in mind," his armor-bearer said. "Go ahead, I am with you, heart and soul." Jonathan said, Come on, then. We'll cross toward them and let them see us. If they say to us, 'Wait here until we come to you,' we will stay where we are and we will not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands." So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outposts. "Look," said the Philistines, "the Hebrews are crawling out of their holes they were hiding in." The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, "Come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson." Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Jonathan climbed up using his hands, his feet, with his armor-bearer behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer followed and killed behind him. In the first attack, Jonathan and his armor-bearer killed some 20 men in an area of about half an acre. Then panic struck the whole army, those in the camp and the field, and those in the outposts and the raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was a panic sent by God. Saul's outlooks at Gibeah in Benjamin saw the army melting away in all directions. Then Saul said to the men who were with him, "Muster the forces and see who's left us." When they did, it was Jonathan and his armor-bearer who were not there. Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of the God." At that time, it was with the Israelites. While Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the Philistine camp increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Then Saul and all his men assembled and went to battle. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their swords. Those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines had gone up with them out of their camp and went to the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all Israel who were hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined the battle in hot pursuit. So on that day, the Lord saved Israel, and the battle moved beyond Beth Aven. Awesome. Thank you very much, Carson, for sharing. It's quite a long passage, but I think it illustrates something really quite profound to us, especially as we're thinking about a missions week in a couple of weeks. See, the situation is hopeless. All the swords are gone. What are they going to do? Well, Jonathan doesn't fall into cynicism. He doesn't just give up. But interestingly, he doesn't fall into triumphalism either. Here's what he says in verse 6. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Listen to this verse again. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outposts of those uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. For nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." See, he doesn't fall into either of the traps. No, what does Jonathan say? He says, "Perhaps the Lord." And I think that is right, isn't it? Kind of what a glorious attitude to have. Not cynical, not triumphalistic, but perhaps. We're going to look at just kind of pull a few things out of this story. We're going to look at 3 characteristics of Jonathan. We're going to look at 2 contrasts between Jonathan and Saul, and we're going to end with 1 conclusion. So let's go. First, characteristic of Jonathan. See, in the face of everything, Jonathan was passionate about God's glory. See, the situation was the Philistines were laughing at Israel and laughing at their God. And Jonathan said, no, we have to do something. We can't sit back and do nothing. He says, perhaps the Lord. And that makes me think, doesn't it? Kind of UCL CU. Are we passionate about God's glory? Are we really concerned that there are 40,000 students at UCL who have no hope, and probably a large chunk of them laughing at the Lord that can save them? Might we be passionate about God's glory? Might we say, perhaps the Lord? Second characteristic of Jonathan, he wasn't afraid of failure. See, I think it's really interesting that Jonathan wasn't afraid for everything to go wrong, even when it meant risking his life. He goes out with him and one other person, one sword between them, and says, come, let's have a go at that outpost over there. It's the nearest one, let's go for it. He could have died. It could have been a massive failure. But he wasn't afraid to fail. And I'm really hoping we can be the same, right? Evangelism is hard. Evangelism online is hard. But what we can't be is afraid to fail. Let's give it a go. And the chances are we all have outposts near us. See, for him, Jonathan, it was a literal outpost, but think about what your outpost might be. Are you in halls with a group of people? Are you on I know it's weird, but are you still part of a sports team WhatsApp group? Do you have any contact with the people that you study with in your course? There must be an outpost somewhere. And I know it's scary. In fact, it's terrifying, and we risk kind of losing our social status. But are we willing to fail? Are we willing to go out and have a crack at that outpost? It might be something worth praying about later. Lord God, would you reveal to me who I should go to? Third characteristic of Jonathan is that he had a big view of God. See, he didn't look at the kind of tiny Israel. He didn't look at what they didn't have. He said, nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, by many or by few. And that is true for us. In 2 or 3 weeks, when we go to mission, there is nothing that can hinder the Lord, even if we can't give out free food, even if we can't flyer. Nothing can hinder the Lord by saving, by many or by few. Let's believe that, eh? Two contrasts between Jonathan and Saul. Jonathan had a plan and Saul hid. Do you remember that bit at the beginning? It says Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree. That's what a pomegranate tree looks like, apparently. But Saul, you see, in the face of the Philistine army, was hiding under a tree. Pomegranate trees aren't even that impressive. He was just hiding. And it would be so easy for us to hide, wouldn't it? I mean, it's as easy as just not logging on to the computer, and we can hide away. But Jonathan shows us that there is an alternative to hiding away. There's a plan. I think this is one of the very funny things about this story. Is let's just evaluate Jonathan's plan. Essentially, he goes to the outpost and says, "Let's show ourselves. If they come down, we'll fight them. If they say come up, we'll go up, and then we'll fight them." I mean, it's almost ridiculous. A kind of simple plan, but he had one, and I guess I want to say UCL CU has a simple, kind of ridiculous plan for reaching UCL. We'll put on some events and we'll invite people. Then if people come, we can say, do you want to read the Bible? Introduce them to Jesus. I mean, it's a simple plan, but it might just be the plan that saves people. I think this is also kind of mental, because it is really the plan that Jesus set out. I thought this, I came head to head with this when I previously started working for a church. So I'd finished, I left university and I got a job working for a church. And I got a job working for a church because they thought that I was gifted at evangelism. And when they employed me, I kind of had this hidden secret. My hidden secret was nobody had ever become a Christian that I had anything to do with. All these people, they kind of thought I was good at evangelism, but I was there with no one who's ever become, none of my mates had ever become a Christian. And kind of in response to that, I thought, okay, what I need to do is I need to become excellent at answering questions. I need to be excellent. I need to know as much as I can to tackle questions. And after half a year of working for a church, partly as an evangelist, no one had become a Christian. Until I managed to start just reading the Bible with a couple of my mates. And the plan was simple. Read Mark's Gospel. Don't try to know everything. Don't try and answer all the questions. No, I'm going to read Mark's Gospel with my friends. And by God's grace, 3 of them became Christians. The plan is simple. We've just got to go out with our simple plan. Second contrast, the company Jonathan and Saul kept. You won't know this, but if you had read the kind of first bit of Samuel, you would know that this is like a big bad list of false teachers in Israel. Ahijah, Ichabod means the glory of God departed. Saul had surrounded himself with kind of false but looking good religious people. Compare that to who Jonathan was with. He was with his armor bearer, who, when he approached him with his kind of simple, ridiculous plan, said, I am with you, heart and soul. And I want to suggest that this is kind of the point of a Christian union. We are in this together. We are in this together, heart and soul. So, do everything we can for each other. Will we spend the next kind of 2 or 3 weeks praying for each other's mates? When they come along, will you do everything you can to be nice to them, welcome them in, Show them what it is like to have a Christian brother or sister. Let's not just turn and hide. Let's go out with our mates. And finally, we have one conclusion. Just look at how this ends. So in the ESV, it reads, "So on the day the Lord saved Israel." But in the ESV, it kind of ends it more poetically. It says, "So the Lord saved Israel that day." The perhaps the Lord of verse 6 becomes so the Lord. Perhaps the Lord becomes so the Lord. We do not know what God will do in Missions Week. But let's start by saying, perhaps the Lord. Let's fight cynicism and triumphalism. Let's be passionate about God's glory. Let's be unafraid of failure. Let's go in with our big view of God. Let's go in with our simple plan. Let's go in with our mates, with the CU. And maybe that perhaps the Lord might become so the Lord. We don't know what God's going to do, but let's go in praying that he might do something. Let me pray, and then we'll carry on with the other stuff. Father, thank you so much for this story. Thank you so much for what you can teach us